Welcome back to Cancer and Peace, episode number 6. My name is Sean Stewart. I'll be our facilitator today. I can't even speak straight now. And Peter's going to be our host for the podcast. I'm going to kick us off a little bit, take us a direction just off of springboarding again like we usually do off the last episode. And Peter had mentioned a lot about inner journey process, and that's how you and I got to know each other, is that you were on your inner journey, and I entered the inner journey portal through a different port, so to speak, and we met in recovery rooms and became really good friends because we were sharing vulnerably about painful process experiences in our lives. And as we processed that and shared that out, we grew in depth of friendship. We met many times and just shared life together. And when you start sharing your story vulnerably, it moves you into a layer of relationship and friendship with that group of people that I don't think you can get anywhere else, in all honesty. That's my feelings, is that I had a lot of shallow friendships in my life, but the guys that I've shared that level of vulnerability with are the deepest friendships in my life to date. And what happened with me is I also had a similar experience in recovery, is that I found that there were deep character defects. Insecurity is something that I found inside of myself. And insecurity always showed up in anxiety. And so last episode, we talked about feeling things in our body. Anxiety, I can feel anxiety in my gut. So if I wake up in the morning and I feel anxiety, I know that I need to process something. And so I started learning how to process anxiety. And you mentioned fear a lot in the earlier podcasts. And so as I went through this journey, there was a process similar to what you did, that you went through in the recovery space. I had to walk through those first 4 steps too and move out of denial that I had issues. I had to recognize that I had no control over the circumstances of my life around me. And I recognized some really deep need to control that exists in me. I needed to try to control the circumstances and things in my life. And I needed to get to a point where I could surrender those to God and let go of this. And that's the only cure for anxiety, was to learn how to surrender and accept God as the higher power who could manage the things in my life that were unmanageable, that he was the higher power. And so we had a similar experience that came from completely different directions. And what's fascinating to me for my recovery is I came to recovery bringing somebody who needed more of a traditional type recovery journey. And as I listened to people's testimonies, I related, and I was like, I had no idea. And I didn't think I was there for me. And God said, no, I have you here for you, Sean. You're here because I want you to go on this journey. And my bet is that there's a lot of people on this podcast who are hearing your story, Peter, and there's some little layers of, I relate to that. I had that experience. It looks different than yours, Peter. It has a different sound. And I'm going to bet almost everybody here has felt anxiety, anxiousness, and are looking for peace in a cancer storm or a cancer journey that is traumatic, that brings trauma in your lives. And so much of my own personal management tools had to collapse. I had to actually, I tried, so much for me, having insecurity. I tried to work myself into security. I tried to use work as a way to get security in life. And that was an empty road. And it wasn't that I couldn't make lots of money. I could never get to lack of anxiousness by working harder. And once I recognized that thing you shared in the last episode, surrender, was such an important part. And so I think it's part of all of our journeys, but a cancer journey, I think, is so much more poignant because it happens so quickly that we get to this place of lack of control in our lives, and the circumstances move us that way. And I'd like you to see if maybe from your perspective, you talked about starting the inner journey a year before this major surgery in 2015. And in that you had a counselor that you and I have talked to. She kicked your butt all over the place. She wasn't going to let you weasel out with half answers or to kind of make excuses. She wouldn't accept excuses. She wanted you to take ownership. And it was one of the great gifts that she gave you in that period of time in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there was a lot of things that you blamed,
Yeah.
there was a lot of blame that you had, and for
Mm-hmm.
good reason. It wasn't, in a marriage, there's two parties.
Mm-hmm.
There were things to blame, but she wasn't going to let you not take accountability for your part. And that
Mm-hmm.
was such an important. So we're starting in today talking about inner journey.
Mm-hmm.
And again, but we want to focus today a little bit on the spiritual healing tools and the things that you saw in yourself in the midst of your cancer journey
Mm-hmm.
and why it was important to finding peace.
Mm.
And so I know you and I share anxiousness
Mm-hmm.
it's a common overlap in our stories. You felt
Mm-hmm.
anxious about your circumstances, about the future for your kids, all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about your inner journey in that space, and from that counselor's office to have that fit together with your cancer journey.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, for that intro. That's great. I did start the inner journey with this therapist who happened to turn out to be a recovery specialist, and we Skyped 2 hours every week for a year. And yes, I mean, I think the first part of healing, the first step of healing, like if someone said to me, Peter, how do you know someone's healthy? I would say, well, the first step for me was taking responsibility for my choices, for my actions, for my behavior, not blaming others. I think that was huge. And I think that's what, like you said, that's what this person did. And the exercise was an inventory exercise where going back to a person who's hurt me or who I have a resentment against and what happened, what was the result, what was my response, what was the damage done. And the last column is what was my part. And I found out that since I was a little boy, I was highly codependent. Now, I didn't even know what that word meant, that term was, until she explained it to me. But codependency for me is caring more about what other people think about me than what I care about or what God cares about. In other words, living for the expectations of others, living for the approval, the attention of others, living for recognition of others. And wrapped up into that is a performance-based value system. So,
Can I throw some definitions too? Just
yeah.
getting your value from people, places, and things,
Yeah.
from others,
Yeah.
is codependency. And I want to throw one other thing. I just read this. One of our mutual friends sent this article over, and it was from David French, but he wrote about things you need in the church. We talk about women want love and men want respect.
Mm-hmm.
And he defined something that was interesting. I was thinking about it. It fits into codependency. If what a man needs is respect, he's probably codependent.
Mm.
And his argument that he made was that men need purpose.
Mm.
And purpose is more important than respect. And so
Yeah.
codependency is when you
Yeah,
need
that's
from
good.
somebody else
Yeah.
something to sustain your value.
Yeah. So that is a core issue of mine, something I still struggle with today, but I've experienced a lot of healing and freedom in that area. However, when I am looking for the approval of others, or I'm looking for an outcome, or I'm being perfectionistic, anxiety is a big factor.
Is perfectionist a word?
But anxiety becomes something that is part and parcel of that journey, because when I don't get what I quote need or am looking for and I'm blaming others, I become anxious. I go into a social situation and it's anxiety producing. What will I be recognized here? Will I get attention? Will I be lonely in this social situation? I mean, there's all kinds of thoughts that can go through my head all at once. But the issue is having an anxious mindset. And I've had that my whole life. And, how it's come out is even in high school, I threw up almost every morning for 2 years going to high school. And it was about being accepted and performing well and all that. It became something that became this overriding emotion for me, and I didn't know what to do with it. So we went to GI doctors. We tried to treat it medically, and my MO was to isolate. If I being with people was hard enough, so I would isolate and, try to earn the approval. If someone said, well, what is Peter like? Well, he's a nice guy, but I'm not sure where he fits in because he seems to be friends with everyone. But, and the type of thing is, well, can I get the approval? Being a real big time people pleaser was an issue for me, big time. And I think, so I've got this core issue of codependency, anxiety, and then I get diagnosed with life-threatening cancer. And for me, it's the anxiety is all wrapped up in the threat of my future, the threat of financial issues, the pressures, and the threat of death, and all those issues. So it's like that's the thought process that I go through, and it still goes on today. And I ask myself a question every day, and it's more of a check called a heart check.
Mm-hmm.
You probably know that, but
I do.
I have to intentionally ask myself this and do a heart check because it's very deliberate and intentional. And it's, am I hurting? That's the H. Am I exhausted? The E. Am I angry? A. Am I resentful? Am I tense? And a lot of times the tension is, I've got a test. I've got to do a scan. I've got a procedure. Are they going to find cancer again? What's going to happen? I have an infusion. I got blood work. My blood work hasn't looked good for a while. There's always an issue. My kidney function numbers are some of the worst they've ever been right now. What does that mean? Where's my kidney function going? It's an uncertain future, and it's, fear, doubt, uncertainty kind of thing. And that fuels my anxiety. So the next issue is, what do I do about it?
Yeah, but this is a shared common journey. It's not just
Yeah.
a cancer journey, but I
Right.
think you're wanting to connect the importance of that. And we had talked last time about this concept of, and failure of nerve is one of the greatest gifts we can give people as a non-anxious presence. And on the surface, you could just say, well, I'll not be anxious around people. And that is a fool's errand. You are going to fail if it's just, I'm going to try to show non-anxiousness. Because anxiousness has to be processed. To get rid of anxiety, you have to process the hurts, and you have to go. So we're talking about this because it's such an important part of the inner journey, and the inner journey is such an important part of the cancer journey in finding peace. And so you're connecting these together, and so am I, because it's such an important part of our walk and journey for anybody who's looking for peace. They need to know themselves. And something I thought was interesting is that you mentioned throwing up in high school as our body signaling to us there's a problem. Is that one of the first things we may know is that our body signaling a problem that is not just a physical problem, is signaling that there's something that's going on inside of our spirits and our emotions that needs to be worked through. And you got kicked off of that with this therapist, and you've continued that through recovery work and through emotionally healthy spirituality work, and many other tools on top of that. But even part of that with your Cancer and Peace support group is processing healthily emotions and feelings and getting to the heart of who you are.
Trauma work, everything. Yeah.
Trauma work, yes. And so it's important to feel these things and to know these things inside of yourself. And last time you mentioned doing an inventory, and a step 4 inventory is you started writing down this work and identifying what was going on inside of yourself. What are other parts of inner journey work that we should talk about from your perspective that a cancer patient should know about for finding that inner peace?
I mean, I think absolutely. The problem is twofold. I think it's the cancer patient's willingness to be vulnerable, and it's the problem of not having a safe place to be vulnerable in. I mean, I think without the combination of I'm in so much pain and I've got to start connecting with these emotions, but I don't have a place to do it in. That's a problem. That's why in the cancer support group we try to provide a safe place for people to do that, to process emotions. But it's any place that someone, whether it's a trusted friend who will not try to fix, who's not defensive but will just listen, active listening, that's good, or a therapist or something like that. For me, it's been in my in the rooms of recovery. I do have a therapist, but it's those safe places where I can be completely vulnerable and honest. And then it's being honest about those emotions. Like for instance, anxiety. I ask myself, Peter, what am I scared of right now? Like I'm heading down to the hospital. I have a PET scan. It just happened to me a month ago. Wow, I'm feeling the sensation inside of my body of anxiety. My stomach is churning, my back is tightening, my shoulders are tight. I'm driving down, and I start to do some like meditative kind of exercise, deep breathing, that kind of thing. And then I'm like, well, what am I scared of? And that's when I go through the process of, well, they might find cancer. And it's like, okay, well, have you been down this? Is this your first rodeo? No, it's not. And what's the worst case scenario, Peter? And it's, well, I could pass. And then it's like, well, is that really the worst? And no, it's not. It's not the worst case scenario. I know where I'm going. I've had a lot of time to get my house in order, so to speak, and to get people in my life prepared for that event. So that's really not the worst thing. And so it's really another opportunity for me to enter into, again, this place of surrender and trust. And another part that goes along with it that I do quite frequently is I do I have an attitude of gratitude. I go into, well, let's talk about what's happened in this journey and those things that you're grateful for. Let's talk about that. So I'll revisit some of those things, kind of remembering, honestly remembering where my higher power, Jesus, has rescued me, has been there, has given me unbelievable riches, and yet not avoiding the reality of how hard it's been. I mean, on the one hand, it's been torturous, but on the other hand, it's been the richest journey that I've ever been on. So anxiety is part of the trip, part of the journey, but I think it's important to express it, to feel it, to express it, because you and I both know it's a Pete Scazzera concept. Emotions get buried alive; they don't die. So they need to be revealed and expressed, and then, I think it's harder for us guys because we don't have those kind of as many vulnerable relationships, and we're not used to the language of vulnerability. So I think that's what the recovery world has been a huge benefit for me, the inner journey world, because it has encouraged me to be vulnerable.
So that's been my experience too, is prior to going into the inner journey recovery work, I remember one of my closest friends now who I had moved all over the country with this guy. And we had shared hard times together, seen a lot of difficult things, and we made 3 major moves. And I remember us sitting here in New York and we were out to dinner, just he and I having a catch up. And he just looks at me, he's like, Sean, you never share anything. And I looked inside, I was like, oh, he's right. I didn't change in that moment. I didn't, all of a sudden, start making changes. I wasn't at that wall point where I was ready. And I had shared that with you on a different discussion the other day. But what I'm hearing you talk about in this journey is something that's deeply relational. Is that the cancer journey to find peace is not an isolated journey. You can't do it in isolation. And if you really want to get to peace, you shouldn't do it without vulnerability. You have to vulnerably get connected with others around you. And that begins that journey. And to move out of anxiety, you have to admit that you have anxiety and process it. It's not, I won't feel anxiety. Peace, when you think about cancer and peace, what I think you're saying is that peace isn't something that is, hey, I did anxiety and now I'm at peace and I stay there. It's No, I have to continually process the very next day.
Mhm.
What am I feeling today?
Mhm.
And I have to do that in a community since I can't just do it all in my head either. And I think this is
Mhm.
probably a mistake that is made so much of the time. And what I found from my own recovery journey
Mm.
from anxiety and this need to control was it had to be with other people.
Mm.
And so you're running a cancer support group,
Mhm.
and you're hearing these stories. I'm going to bet that you've seen both sides of this equation, where you've seen people who have worked in isolation,
Mhm.
and you've seen people who've worked and found deep connection with people.
Mhm.
Um, do I even have to guess which one is successful?
I mean, I'm gonna just, I've seen one of my buddies who was diagnosed with cancer, and that's when we were meeting in person before the pandemic, and he came into the cancer room and like a burst through the door, came in with like three other people with him, and he was like like in a crisis and like crying and just going to explode. And so he sat down at the table and people prayed over him, and I said, why don't you join us for the meeting? And when we have somebody new in the cancer support group, I have everyone go around and explain what they've been diagnosed with, their medical history, just so that we know, who's been dealing with what. And he was a nervous wreck. And by the time he was last to share out of maybe 13, by the time we got to him, he had his arm around the person next to him. He had a smile on his face. Hey, I'm in a room here with people who share my issue, and my diagnosis doesn't even sound as serious as these other people's diagnoses. And it was just comforting for him to be in a place where he could then share what was going on in his life. And what a change, just in him having that opportunity to be around other people who were sharing vulnerably about what was going on in their lives.
I think this is an important connection point that you're making, and you're talking about something that I think is in a sense of purpose too. But my experience, I guess my fears going into, why would my friends say you never share anything, was because I was operating from fear,
Mm-hmm.
and I needed to control information to protect myself. I was afraid if people found out that I was a phony, they would see me as this insecure person, and
Mm-hmm.
they would not value me. That I would be, revealed as not enough.
Mm-hmm.
That was deeply inside of me, and so information was power. And what I learned in the recovery concepts, this thing you've talked about it before, and it was getting to poverty of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see now is that the very things that I saw myself as the most insecure about, my deepest issues, are the very things that God wants to use for my ministry, like the hey, what He wants to show His power in,
Mm-hmm.
His strength in. And so, while I'm withholding that, in some ways I'm withholding God's power in my life. It's like the moment I try to work from strength and try to hold on to everything in my own strength, I'm really holding back God's power in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such a deep revelation. And so I learned so much about admitting, you know, um, my own character defects, how, I was abusive towards my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was freedom in admitting that, because it let go of the bonds of those in my life, and then it restored the relationships with my kids the moment I started sharing those and working through that process. And I got to think, for a cancer patient who also starts going through this process, that they actually will start to see purpose, and they're opening themselves up. I think the reason why there's peace is they're opening themselves up to God's power in their lives
Mm-hmm.
by embracing their weakness.
Yeah, I mean, Sean, it's such a key concept what you're saying. It's why I love to work in this area, is because it's one event in a person's life where they truly are faced with the fact that they're not in control, and they have to yield control to somebody else. This journey is beyond what they're capable of actually fixing. And so they're put more into a place, it's ripe for getting to connecting to the dot that says, hey, by the way, I'm powerless over this journey that I'm in the sense of I can't fix it. And so what do I do with that? What do I do with that feeling of powerlessness? And, here our higher power is Jesus Christ, and he's saying, blessed are the people who are in that place, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And it's this, even though you're in this powerless state, I'm in a powerless state, I choose to surrender and trust to my higher power. And in fact, like this is my issue with some of the Eastern stuff is I don't manufacture peace within me.
Right.
Peace comes from my higher power.
Yeah.
I think it's key. It's, because I've seen people on their cancer journeys trying to manufacture peace within them. And I haven't seen it work.
I call it putting on a face of peace.
Yeah.
And I remember doing that when my mom passed from cancer. It's been 25 years, but she had breast cancer that relapsed into her lungs. I remembered her funeral putting on a face of strength, and I even smiled to make it look like I had it all together, like everything was fine. But it was just show. It was all show. It was me not being willing to feel those emotions and process. And it's such a false form of peace because it didn't help the circumstances. As a matter of fact, what I recognized is I was shoving everyone away. And something that you were just saying that just tripped this trigger in me is like, when you share vulnerably this cancer journey, the gift you get, one of the great gifts you get is you find out you're not alone.
Yes.
You just described this guy who was coming and he was feeling this, and he listened to all these people, but as he was willing to share his own story, he found out he was not alone.
Isolation is a killer.
It's a killer.
Yeah.
We had a guy that worked here, came through here, was connected with our organization here. He just died a couple of years ago of a brain tumor, and he wouldn't share. Had a faith, but he had a belief that if he shared this journey with people who didn't believe that he was going to be healed, that he wouldn't find healing. So he didn't share. And I grieved for this guy because he missed out on such an important part of the cancer journey of finding connection with others and sharing in the hope of the sufferings. Like the fact that there are fellow sufferers and that you can comfort one another in your suffering and learn from each other and share infirmities is a beautiful part of the journey, and it's as if he gave that part of the journey up, and I grieved for him. I really did.
Like a missed opportunity.
It was a missed opportunity. Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
And that's why I mentioned purpose. It's like if I think part of this, from my take on it, as somebody who's been tangentially connected, and having had so many close relatives and friends who have passed in this space, it was the ones who really embraced the inner journey, their suffering, and shared it with others and found deep connection, that they found purpose in the midst of the journey. And in that purpose and in that connection with God, they found peace.
Yeah. I think it's, sometimes I see people sharing their health journey, cancer journey, to sort of show off how they're like trusting in God and that kind of thing. And that's just where they're at. That's fine. But the real the real peace comes from sharing vulnerably with each other. That's where that's admitting, kind of confessing, but also, we have such riches with our higher power and the scriptures. It's very rich faith. And so we've got all that whole pile of knowledge and stuff that we can grab onto, and these truths that we can grab onto. And so in the context of being in a place of pain and suffering, sharing your vulnerabilities, sharing where you're at, experiencing deep emotions, and then having truths that you can grab onto. That's a great place to be.
I want to take a step further into here because I mentioned for my own journey, if I had to deal with those areas that where my part was bad, where I was out of control, and the next step that we work into is when we make this inventory, and we make a list of all these people that we've harmed, and because we've just identified that this is a deeply relational journey, as we begin that process of amends, where we go and start working on restoring relationships. Because one of the ways to peace is for us to clean our side of the street. And there is a real big process that you've gone through, that I've been involved with in the recovery space, and is me taking ownership and beginning the process of cleaning my side of the street, because we each have a part in the chaos and the destruction around us. None of us have gone through life without hurting somebody, without creating problems. And to find peace, one of the things that's important in this journey is to start cleaning our side of the street. Start doing the hard work of, here's the people I've harmed, and taking ownership and working on something we call amends. You want to share anything in that space from your own journey that is kind of the next layer in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, it's something that I emphasize to cancer patients who have a difficult prognosis, and and the issue is, well, what good can come out of this? And it's like, well, so you don't have an end date. You think you might have one, but God knows the end date. But you have this process you're going to go through, and it's quicker than other people know their end date is. What a great time to work on relationships. What a great time to do an amends, to clean up, these relationships. For me, I've gone through the amends process with key people in my family. I don't like to do the amends process because it's only focusing on my part. So it's like, this is what I've done.
If you said you'd like to, I'd say you need to go back and and identify this lying thing.
But I love the feeling that comes after I do it, and I still have more people to do. But I love the release and peace. The healing and the peace that comes from, this baggage of resentment. Once I do the amends, the baggage, the burden gets thrown away. It's like, okay, that's beautiful.
So what we've been trying to identify in this episode is quite a bit of some real practical steps of engaging the inner journey that helps you engage peace in a cancer journey, in a cancer diagnosis that carries into this reality of your life. And we're into this quite a ways time-wise. So today, is there something you want to just highlight before we close as the trail markers to think about from your perspective, Peter, just closing out the connect it all together to wrap up this episode?
I mean, I'll just say that it's totally foreign for a cancer patient to think about an inner journey concept along with getting a diagnosis. Totally foreign. And yet for me, the inner journey has allowed me to get to a place of peace within the cancer journey. So my thesis today would be that, the inner journey can be incredibly effective to bring about peace within a cancer struggle, within a cancer journey.
Yeah, and just the benefits of restored relationships at this stage of life is such a huge gift.
Yep.
And it's definitely a gift you would want to leave to your friends and family and those around you, your legacy.
Yep.
So we're going to share a lot more as we go along. And I appreciate everybody for being with us today. If you want to connect with more resources from Peter, go to cancerandpeace.com. His book is out there and more resources beyond that. And we look forward to seeing you on another episode. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Sean.